basically what Jethro told Moses what to do.
Please welcome to the stage Don Petrie.
What a great day in Mesa, Arizona. We're in the desert, we got a rain, and we get to talk about the Second Amendment. Let me tell you, anybody here support the Second Amendment? Let me see your hands. That's great. Anyone that doesn't or is foolish enough to raise their hand? No, I didn't think so. Are you passionate about the Second Amendment, about our individual rights?
Yes.
Me too. Matter of fact, Shane asked me the other day, he said, Donnie, he said, are you always this passionate about the Second Amendment? And I looked at him and I said, only when I'm alone or with somebody. Now, let's talk about this Second Amendment and what it says. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Let's say that second clause again. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Whose right is it?
Mine.
And who are the people?
Me.
Absolutely. Now, let me ask you, what the anti-rights crowd says. Let me stop right there for a minute. This is important. One thing we've got to start doing is we've got to quit co-opting the other side's narrative. We got to quit adopting their language. They want to call this fight pro-gun, anti-gun. It has nothing to do with guns. It's just like this clicker right here. If I set this clicker down on that table, it does nothing. If I set my gun down there on that table, it does nothing until an individual picks it up. And that individual can take that gun and he can either do evil or he can do good. So let's quit calling it a pro-gun or anti-gun fight. This is a fight about rights. And those folks that I'm talking about are anti-rights. That's an anti-rights crowd. And that's the way I'm going to refer to them tonight. Which raises the question, and this anti-rights crowd wants to say that this Constitution we have, that's the rule book for this great country, is outdated somehow. That this Second Amendment is outdated somehow. The only thing that's outdated is their approach. They want to take guns away. That's outdated. That was outdated. That issue was resolved in 1791. It's been outdated for a long time. But it brings this issue up too. Where does this right come from? Our Creator, right? Doesn't come from the Constitution, right? Doesn't come from the government. And how do we know that? We only have to go to the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And within those rights is the right to keep and bear arms for our self-defense. Now, let's look at what was said by Chief Justice Morrison Waite, 1876, 150 years ago. in a case called United States v. Cruikshank, Chief Justice Wade said this right, he was talking about the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms, is not a right guaranteed by the Constitution. Neither is it in any manner dependent upon the instrument for its existence. And then he went even further. He said, the Bill of Rights does not grant rights to the people. Rather, it's merely a list of inalienable rights endowed by our Creator. So how did this anti-rights crowd get off the tracks so bad? I mean, this is 1876. Now, I think it's also important to know what some of the founding fathers said and the patriots that lived in and around the founding era. Here's one of them. Simeon Howard, Harvard graduate and a minister, 1773. He said, a person who would stand fast in their liberty should furnish themselves with weapons proper for their defense and learn to use them. Here's another one. Dr. Richard Price, friend of Benjamin Franklin, patriot, minister, and this is pretty good. This is 1776, remember, or 79. Every inhabitant, he's talking about every American, had in his house, back in that day, as part of his furniture, a book on law and government to enable him to understand his civil rights. You can't hear me? All right. I'm yelling good enough. So that's, you'll be all right. So every household had this book of law and government to enable them to understand their civil rights. They also had a musket to do what? To enable them to defend those rights. They also had a Bible to enable them to understand and practice their religion. Oh, but we could turn the time back to 1779. Where did we go wrong? Those values, every household knowing about government, knowing your civic rights, knowing how to defend your rights. Then we have Thomas Jefferson. No free man shall be debarred the use of arms. He also said, and this is interesting, here he's talking about physical exercise. Here's what he says. As to the species of exercise, I advise the gun. While this gives a moderate exercise to the body, it gives boldness, enterprise, and independence of the mind. Let your gun, therefore, be the constant companion of your walks. I like the way Tom thought. How about you? Here's a guy that was a real patriot, Roger Sherman. Let me tell you a little bit about Mr. Sherman. He was the only guy that signed all four of the critical documents in this country. The Continental Association, the Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, and the Constitution. Thomas Jefferson said of him, "That is Mr. Sherman of Connecticut, a man who never said a foolish thing in his life." And here's what he said about the right to keep and bear arms. The privilege of every citizen, and one of his most essential rights, was to bear arms and to resist every attack upon his liberty or property by whomsoever made. Now let's go to my favorite. Shane's had to put up with this quote time and time and time again. This quote comes from St. George Tucker. He was a colonel in the Virginia militia, was wounded in the Revolutionary War, was a law professor at William and Mary, and later was a justice on the Virginia Supreme Court. He also wrote a treatise that was a 5-volume edition of what was called Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England. That legal treatise is essentially the basis for not only the laws in England, but the laws as they came about in America under the common law. And what St. George Tucker said about the Second Amendment is this. He's referring to the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms, may be considered as the true palladium of liberty. Palladium. I'm a cowboy. That's a little bit of a big word. I had to do a little research. All St. George Tucker meant by that was safeguard. He saw the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms, as the safeguard of our liberties, all of our liberties. The Second Amendment protects the liberties and rights set forth in the First Amendment, the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, on down the line. He goes on to say, wherever the right of the people to keep and bear arms is, under any color or pretext whatsoever, prohibited, liberty, if not already annihilated, is on the brink of destruction. When we look at the way the founders and these great patriots from the founding era looked at our Second Amendment rights, we understand that they viewed the Second Amendment, and not just the Second Amendment, because it's more the right to keep and bear arms for our self-defense, this inalienable right that was given to us by our Creator. They viewed that as something that was absolutely necessary to our security and our liberty. Well, what's happened? Over the years, decades now, the anti-rights crowd has slowly but surely ate away at those rights, and they continue to do so today. And they do it, they tell you, you hear this from all of them. I don't want to ban guns. We just want reasonable regulation. Well, we know that's not true. Let me play a video of, and before we get into it, Dianne Feinstein was one of the chief legislators that rammed through the 1994 assault arms ban, assault rifle ban. And since that time, it's been determined that ban did nothing. It did nothing to make us safer. It did nothing to reduce violence. It did nothing to reduce homicides in this country. I'll tell you what it did do. It did two things. It took a lot of money to run that program that we paid for, and it restricted and infringed on our Second Amendment rights. But back to this, we're just going to give you so we just want reasonable regulation. Let's listen to Dianne Feinstein in 1995.
California Senator Dianne Feinstein worked for more than a year to get the assault weapons bill passed in the face of ferocious opposition from the National Rifle Association. She says she got the best she could. If I could have gotten 51 votes in the Senate of the United States for an outright ban, picking up every one of them, Mr. and Mrs. America, turn them all in, I would have done it. I could not do that. The votes...
That's one of the communists.
Mr. and Mrs. America, turn them all in. That's their end game. We know it. Dianne Feinstein told us that. I don't get along that good with these darn mics anyway. Now, the anti-rights crowd is trying to take away your Second Amendment rights under the guise of public safety or reducing violence. Well, What about those gun rights laws that they've got in place? Does anyone feel safer? How about the magazine ban, banning magazines that carry over 10 rounds? That make you feel any safer?
No.
I got 10 rounds. The bad guy, how many rounds does his magazine hold?
30.
At least. Oh, but wait a minute. There's a law. You can't have the 30-round magazines. The bad guys are going to, of course, trash those high capacity magazines and go to the low capacity magazine, because that's the law. We know how foolish that sounds. Here's what Benjamin Franklin says about giving up the liberties for safety. They that can give up essential liberty to obtain a little temporary safety deserve neither safety nor liberty. Thomas Paine also talked about the fact what happened when you took the guns away from the good guys. The supposed quietude of a good man lures the ruffian, while on the other hand, arms discourage and keep the invader and the plunderer in awe, and preserve order in the world as well as property. Horrid mischief would ensue were one half of the world deprived of the use of guns. Folks, I'm telling you right now, the anti-rights crowd is trying to invoke a horrid mischief on all of us. That's what they're doing. Another thing to remember about the right to keep and bear arms for your self-defense. Think about it. When seconds count, the police are only minutes away. What? Yeah, let's look at it. Actually, hold it up one second. This video we're going to look at is an ad put out by every town for gun safety. It's a association funded by ex-Mayor Bloomberg, and this ad is supposed to promote stiffer gun laws for domestically violent perpetrators. Let's look at it and see what you think of it.
911, what's your emergency?
It's my ex. He's trying to break in.
You have a restraining order?
Yes, please, my son is here.
Open the door!
I need you to stay
He
calm.
just broke in the door. You need to come now. Get away from him. Hey! Get away! Get out of here!
I'm taking him!
When seconds count, the police are only minutes away. I submit to you that this ad is a great ad, but not for gun control. This ad is a great ad for the Second Amendment. If that unfortunate young lady had exercised her Second Amendment rights, had got trained and become proficient in the use of a gun, and her boyfriend or ex-husband, whatever he was, knew it, I doubt he comes through the door. And if he does, she shoots him. And you know what? He's dead, not her, and this world's a little better place. All right. Let's see where we're at now. And I'm running out of time. 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Okay. For the first time in 220 years, the Supreme Court of the United States has settled as a legal matter what the actual nature and scope of the Second Amendment was. It wasn't about the militia. It wasn't about a community right. Here's what the District of Columbia and B. Heller in 2008 said. The Second Amendment protects an individual right to keep and bear arms for self-defense unconnected to the militia. Don't let anybody tell you any different. That, folks, is the law of the land. And then 2 years later, for the first time in 220 years, the Supreme Court determined whether or not the Second Amendment applied only to the federal government or also applied to the state government. That's been a big issue. They decided that it applied to the state government and restricted the state government just as much as it did the feds. So we've got the supreme law of the land that tells us what the Second Amendment means and says that it applies to the states. Does that stop the anti-gun, anti-rights people? No. What are the current challenges? Well, I'll tell you quickly. One of the key challenges going on in our courts around the country are whether or not the Second Amendment protects the right to carry outside the house. They want to limit Heller because Heller involved a statute regarding keeping a gun inside the house, so they want to narrow it. I submit to you, Heller was much broader than that. They just want to ignore it, but we're fighting that. Right now we have a case in the Ninth Circuit that's been decided. Here's what the court said in the Ninth Circuit. Carrying, good luck in the Ninth Circuit. This time it worked pretty good. Here's what the Ninth Circuit says. Carrying an operable handgun outside the home for the lawful purpose of self-defense constitutes bearing arms within the meaning of the Second Amendment. I can't believe that I would applaud the Ninth Circuit, but this time they got it right. Now, caveat, that was a 3-judge panel. It's being appealed up to the en banc Ninth Circuit, where the whole bunch of them will weigh in on it. I would bet the Ninth Circuit will strike down that ruling. It'll go up to the Supreme Court, and our Supreme Court will come back with exactly that kind of ruling. So, a couple other things: ban on firearms, certain types of firearms, ban on magazine capacity, universal gun registration. Folks, keep an eye on the United Nations Small Arms Trade Treaty. Watch that like a hawk. We have actually signed it. It violates our Constitution, violates the Second Amendment. John Kerry was directed by our esteemed leader, Barack Hussein Obama, to sign the dang thing, and he did. But it hasn't been ratified by the Senate, and if I have anything to do with it, and if you have anything to do with it, it should never see the light of day on the Senate floor. Now let me quickly go through what I think we can do to preserve our rights in the Second Amendment and to keep and bear arms. Number one, stay informed. Stay informed and keep on your state and federal leaders, your legislators. Watch those Second Amendment laws as they come up and make sure our leaders are on top of them. Support groups that are on the front line, like the NRA. Stand up and be heard. Be passionate about your Second Amendment right, but remember, only when you're alone or with somebody. Exercise your right to keep and bear arms. Recognizing with this right comes an important obligation. Know the laws of the state, know how to use your firearms, learn and practice the rules of responsible and safe use of your firearms. Understand the legal, practical, and emotional consequences if you ever have the unfortunate need to use your gun for self-defense. And K-Force Vanguard, Shane will touch on this also, has an impact course coming up that will teach those very things. It's a full day, 8-hour course on September 6th. We have great instructors. Get registered. You can see Evelyn outside in the foyer and register for this great deal. If you're going to exercise your Second Amendment right, you need to be trained. That's an obligation you take on when you exercise that right. And with that, I'll close and thank you very much for your time.